Beautiful. Okay, so it's 2:12. I think we ought to get started. Hi, everyone, and I know it's been a long day of enjoying this year's Public Space Summit, and I'm honored that you've decided to spend your last session with us, learning about how to create a sustainable volunteer program. My name is Adrienne Bernardez, and I'm a project coordinator with the Parks Alliance. And I'm super excited to get the conversation going. We've got a lot to cover, so this session will really hone in on how to empower people to care and take ownership of their community spaces through volunteering, and how to create an impactful volunteer program from the ground up, because when people come together and are engaged in their community spaces, neighborhoods are changed for the better, and SF is a better place to live. So hopefully by the end of this session, you'll have some inspiration and have a few strategies on how to kickstart your own volunteer program. We've got an extraordinary group of community leaders here who will share their experiences and insight on how to build a volunteer program from the ground up. And these folks have been doing the work, boots on the ground, doing incredible work all over the Bay Area. And so without further ado, I'll have the panelists introduce themselves. If you could give us your name, pronouns, a little background, and overview of the volunteer program of your group or organization. I'll kick it off to you, Sophie.
Ooh. Okay, hi everybody. Nice to see you all. It's so weird to be the maskless ones, but
Yeah, I know.
like at least I can smile at you. So Sophie Constantinou, she, her, and I. So I am part of two projects that are diametrically opposed to each other in their composition, and so I think I'll try and talk a little bit about how they're different, because volunteerism in them is different. But I am in the Bernal Glen, so I call my project the Bernal Cut Beautification Project, and I'm also working at the Buchanan Mall, which is in the Western Addition. And maybe I'll stop there and just pass the torch.
Hi everybody. Ooh, this is loud. I'm Forrest. I'm a huge fan of Sophie's work, I'll tell you that. I'm with TogetherSF. We're the largest growing network of volunteers and community caretakers. My pronouns are he and him, sorry. Forrest, he and him. And I'd like to share a little bit of how I got started in all this. I used to live in Berkeley. I used to work in San Francisco. I worked in finance. And I got inspired by the Stop Asian Hate movement last year to do Asian community organizing around events that stop Asian hate. And that's how I ended up leaving my career and joining TogetherSF as a program manager. And that's what inspires me to do my work, is bringing people together, especially from San Francisco's Asian community.
Awesome. Hey, I am Monica Stafford. I work for the Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy, and I work in support of the OneTam partnership. So I've been in SF for many years, and I'm currently focused in Marin, specifically on Mount Tam. And I got started in community stewardship and in volunteer management in like the 90s, because I'm getting super old now, and I think that's a good thing. But I was part of the team of folks that started the community stewardship program when the Presidio left the military and became a national park. So in my capacity as a volunteer organizer, I have led programs at the Presidio. We started a program at the Presidio Native Plant Nursery. I've done a lot of habitat restoration programs. I've done environmental education. I've done fundraising with volunteers, and right now my role is the community engagement manager for OneTam. So I get to introduce the parks to the people and the people to the parks. So. And my pronouns are she and her.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. And thank you to you three for being here today. I'm thrilled to have you and share your knowledge with the rest of this beautiful group that we have here. So a successful volunteer program takes time, it takes skill, it takes a great deal of effort. And building a robust volunteer program and having good volunteer management is not something that happens overnight. It's not going to take one event. It's a commitment. So once, a group and organization realizes and accepts that commitment, and you've decided that volunteers are a useful group to engage with, and you want to, get started on building a volunteer program, how do you devise a purposeful mission for that volunteer program? And I want to kick it off to Monica first, but Sophie and Forrest, feel free to chime in when you're ready. But I wanted to kick it off to Monica first, as you've said that you've dabbled in building a bunch of different volunteer programs, from habitat restoration to fundraising to education. So, yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something that sometimes I think I've made the mistake of just diving into the work without necessarily articulating what your vision and mission is. So my first program working in the Presidio Nursery, my vision could have been specifically it's just to grow a lot of plants. But really it's much more than that. And maybe my goal isn't just to grow a lot of plants. Maybe the goal is to build community and to become a place for civic engagement. I mean, we've heard so many inspiring stories, and I know that all of you here, we're certainly not the only experts in this room. There's so much inspiration, but it's really important as a volunteer manager to just think what are your primary goals, and then not only have it in your head, but really articulate it, because you need to get people inspired. So just be ready, articulate it in your mind, collect feedback, find out what do other people think you should be doing, because maybe they've thought about something you haven't, and practice saying it and get other people excited about it.
I think that's a great, sorry. I think that's a great answer. I definitely agree that it's important to articulate the mission. I think, people might be coming to a TogetherSF event to pick up trash or to support a local business, but it's important to talk about how these reach larger goals, like creating a cleaner, safer, and more cared for city, or supporting Asian business to stop Asian hate. And that's what really inspires people to go that extra mile and come out and volunteer for something.
Right.
Nice. Okay, well, I'm gonna use you as an example. I think one of the things for our neighborhood group is that we decided at some point we would do a monthly cleanup, and we established a group of people that were very committed, and every month, boom, we were out there. Now, I'm into plants, so a lot of it was beautification and landscaping, and we would kind of pick up trash if we had to. Some people would just ignore it, but I had to train people how to distinguish a native plant from a weed. There was a little bit of that education, but because I was so passionate about the gardening piece, that was exciting, and the community was seeing change and seeing things bloom. But at some point, we started to sort of peter out, or putter, or sputter, and it was starting to feel like a drag, right? Every 2 weeks, I'm sending out an email. Okay, everybody, we're gonna have a great time. We're gonna do lots of amazing work. Woo! And so at some point, we TogetherSF sort of showed up on the horizon of opportunity, and we were like, oh my God, what a wonderful thing. And so we partnered, and suddenly our little group of 20, 30 people that would then go and do our little tasks was 80 people. Now, I'm going to tell you right now that when 80 people show up and you have 80 vests and you're passing out bags like crazy, it is exhilarating, amazing, really exciting, and totally overwhelming. But I think that what we had to do after a couple of these deep infusions of total strangers, not neighbors, but total strangers, was to ask ourselves, why were we doing these cleanups? Okay, trash. Lots of trash. And in the months that we were picking up trash, there was no gardening allowed because there was no water from the sky. But I think it made us reckon with what was our purpose. And I think the truth is, our purpose that we had to talk about was we wanted to build neighborhood stewards. So having enthusiastic people from Pacifica was really cool, but if they didn't come back, unless they gave us just a nice boost of energy, we needed to channel that and remind the neighborhoods that we were growing strong together in our neighborhood. And I think that it was really important to be able to have a big infusion, but also to be able to reckon with, actually, if you were in the last session and Lisa's over there, it's like, Lisa, how can your group get stronger and how can we be better partners? Yeah. And I don't have to go to every one of your cleanup days, and you don't have to come to every one of mine, but how are we a deeper, stronger network? How do we share flyering? How do we get our teenagers $50 for the weekend to spread 200 flyers in the neighborhood, right? Like, so thinking about what we needed. And I think you were a big awakening for us because we needed that, but we also needed to take that momentum and run with it. So that's my 2 cents.
That's great, thank you. And Sophie, so you started the Bernal Cut project way back in 2012, correct? And it started, just as you said, it started small. And now you're backed by, this really powerful group of community-driven volunteers in your neighborhood. And can you talk about what that was like, getting this small project, lifted off the ground? And do you have any advice for, groups that are eager to do the work, that want to get started and make big change in their neighborhood, but may have less time and resources than, is ideal?
Yeah, that's a great question. So part of the little story I just told, when we first started, we didn't have a regular meeting time day, and we actually got a grant through the Parks Alliance, not of money, but of plants. We had 20 trees and 400 native shrubby type things, and suddenly we were like, okay, we really have to organize both the land prep and then the planting day. And so it was this really big event. We had a couple lists, we did a lot of flyering, brought a bunch of people out, and then moved from this, from wasteland to something beautiful to a quarterly work days. And that seemed like all I could handle anyway. I was out there every week doing watering and weeding and stuff, and would bring people in when there was, and people would just show up, right? They're like, oh, can we help? But the quarterly thing was that kind of, this is all, I could handle. And then at some point I met with people who said they were feeling guilty that they couldn't come at that particular quarterly day, so they stopped coming because they felt like they felt guilty. So taking a pulse of what people were able to do and who else could organize was a really big piece. So my colleague and neighbor Ross, who you know well, Ross said, well, let me do garbage, and we'll alternate, and let's do monthly, because the neighbors really want monthly. And fortunately or unfortunately, during COVID, people were feeling that sense of frustration that they weren't making a difference, and there were things happening in the neighborhood that they weren't impacting. So we kicked in full steam every month. Don't feel guilty if you can't make it, because there's one next month, and they're just going to happen like clockwork. This is where we meet. This is how it happens. And it was a little bit of a machine, right? Like, here are the bags, here are the tools, here's the thing, here's the job, let's go. And alternate. So we're in fall, so we'll do one planting or one gardening or one prep, one mulch, one garbage, one, and it was Mission Street, it was like nasty, dirty stuff, it was sweeping, it was like, that sense. And I think that was more than I thought I could handle in the beginning, but I think that figuring out who your allies are and who can kind of feed your machine, so that you don't always have to show up, but people feel like they can pop in and make a difference, and that there's some enthusiasm. And then, of course, get a burst of a shot in the arm, as they say, from someone like Forrest. Kick it off.
I think we're very fortunate to be in a city where there are so many community caretakers like Sophie and like many others. At TogetherSF we have a monthly event in every district except for the new smaller District 6, and it's not possible unless we have people who want to come out and help. But to Adrian's question, I would say that if you're a group of energetic people around a certain cause, whether it's greening, picking up trash, or whatever you're passionate about, the first step is really reaching out. We're very fortunate to have incredible nonprofits in San Francisco, like the San Francisco Parks Alliance. Thank you for putting this event together. And then TogetherSF, of course, we like to say, you start with us. And many of the volunteer opportunities that we've helped, they've started out with just an email to me or to another member of TogetherSF, and really small orgs like, in the very beginning, Refuse SF, just Vince and his friends and neighbors picking up trash. Dear Community, just a group of young Asian activists who wanted to support Asian businesses, have been able to leverage resources like TogetherSF and other nonprofits and other partners to really grow their brand and service our community.
And I guess if I may, just speaking and thinking about the what you've both touched on, and thinking about when you have limited resources, which we've probably all struggled with, is just, again, how important partnerships are. So just thinking about how you could be working, maybe there's a church down the street, and you could reach out to their community coordinator and find out how you can organize an event that not only serves your goals, which is maybe to beautify your park, but how can you serve their goals? Maybe you can host an event and they can lead a prayer, or what, it could be anything, but it could be another civic organization. And I think in my early days as being a volunteer coordinator, back when I was doing restoration in the Presidio, I would work with groups, and I was always thinking about, like, how can you serve us? And I'm realizing, as I've evolved as a person and as a community manager, I realize it has to go both ways. You really, as a volunteer manager, you really have to be thinking, like, all right, who am I working with today? And how am I serving their needs as well? And by doing so, you can get a lot done with fewer resources.
Excellent. I want to switch gears here. So we have our purpose down. We have, we're leveraging our resources to strengthen our volunteer program. And now comes engagement. How do we get people to know about what we're doing? And I feel like, especially, after 2 years of being quarantined, there's this big, mass of people who are so excited to get out there and do good in their community. So how do we tap into those folks that have never volunteered before? Forrest, how do you engage a wider demographic of folks, including those that represent the next generation? I feel like TogetherSF does this really well.
Yeah, I don't want to let all the secrets out, but I think that the focus we have at TogetherSF, and especially the program managers like myself, Rob, and now we have Lizzie, is relational organizing, and really making relationships with other nonprofit partners like the Parks Alliance, but also community groups, community caretakers, and meeting people where they're at. Every single group of people, even a person with 5 friends, they get together for a reason. I think during the pandemic, people found themselves unable to come out and do stuff. So when the pandemic began to end, people wanted to come out again, but they definitely felt that they didn't want to come out, and just go to a bar, It's too, it doesn't feel right, but they love to come out and do a cleanup or do a gardening activity and then go to a bar afterwards. and that's really kind of the relationships that I was able to find because we were coming out of the pandemic. And I think there's the hyper-locality of San Francisco is something I'm learning because I just moved here. But every single neighborhood has its own microcosm of small and specific needs, and talking to the people who are the stewards of that neighborhood need is how you get people to come out to a cleanup that's in another neighborhood, or to a dining event that's in a restaurant they've never been to before. Is listening to where they're at and then showing them how everything fits into a larger mission, whether it's just caring for our city, stopping Asian hate, or many of the other projects that we're working on.
You make me think about the positive versus the negative, and I think it's easy to sit around and bitch and moan, right? Like, oh, there's a tent at the end of my street, or there's too much trash, or everything sucks, right? Like, there's that negativity that we want to mobilize to change, but I think being able to turn that frustration around into something that is community building and is making a difference, and that is about beautification. I think those words are really important because they're really about making something fantastic. It's not lemonade, but it's making good out of what could easily be a powerless, hopeless situation. And I think we've all felt powerless over crime, or we've all felt powerless over COVID, or our circumstances, but how can these kinds of activities bring power and joy and hope into neighborhoods? And I think that, to the sort of overarching sustainability question, I think people keep coming back because they can see their impact.
I think I would add, I think in terms of motivating new folks, it goes a long way when you can see your impact over the years and you've been there. And when you're working with younger people, or maybe folks who don't normally like to come out and garden, just echoing what you've both said about meeting people where they're at. It's so important to not treat every group of volunteers the same way. And so I mentioned how important partnerships are. And so obviously if you're working with, a group of, Cub Scouts, you might work with them differently than if you're working with a group of folks from your local neighborhood that are specifically interested in how the street looks, versus if you're working with, a group of high schoolers. And so something, again, that I don't think I was always very savvy to when I first started running volunteer programs is meet people where they're at, just like Forrest was saying. And if I'm working with a group of young kids, I'm going to make sure I have a lot of breaks. I'm probably going to have an educational lesson in the middle of the time. And if I'm working with folks that are from the neighborhood and they've been out there every day and they've got a different energy, maybe they don't want a lot of that fluff and they want to get straight to the work. So you have to kind of recognize both sides and respect that. You can't really be forcing people, a group of retirees who want to get out there and just get the work done. You can't force them to necessarily take a break and listen to a 10-minute talk about butterflies because they don't really care. But you better be doing that if you're working with kindergartners, So, yeah. So.
Awesome. What modes of promotion do you guys find works best? We just had earlier today a really great session about social media 101. Do you find, riding that new wave of social media is the best way to get your events and program out there, or is it just good old-fashioned flyering?
Okay, I'm happy to start. Sorry.
Take a stab.
I mean, I'm definitely younger, but I don't understand TikTok and Instagram very well. SEO, search on Google, is a foreign concept to me. I think I'm out in the community a lot, and I talk to people, and I ask them, what brought them to the event. Some of the people are Googling volunteer in SF. Some people see a photo from our Instagram. I think, but the most important way to really pump up an event that you really want people to come to is a good old-fashioned text or call, right? Hey, it's Forrest, we met doing this. Are you free this day? I'm a real believer in traditional organizing, I think is what they call it. And obviously social media is important, but I'm not an expert.
I have been doing this so long, and I'm still not an expert. I have found that there's such different results and outcomes based on your neighborhood and where you are. I keep mentioning the Presidio, which is where I started, and we kind of hung up the sign, we're going to do volunteer programs Wednesdays and Saturdays at the Presidio Nursery, and people just started coming, and it was a regular thing, and before I knew it, I had a group of 20 regulars coming out for every program, And then I crossed the bridge and went over into Marin and kind of did the same model and had almost nobody. So I think that what works in one place might not necessarily work in the other, and it's not necessarily a reflection that you're doing something wrong. So I would just say keep trying. I think what you're both mentioning of just talking to people and reaching out to your contacts, thinking about, again, partnerships. If you're struggling to get some momentum, think again about like who can you be partnering with, who can you be leveraging, whose cause can you be supporting, and then go out and go on a walk and a talk with some potential partners that can bring in more folks.
One of the things that we've been talking about in our neighborhood is the Neighbor Fest. So San Francisco has a program through Livable Cities, which is called Neighbor Fest, and it's basically throwing a party, a block party, and they'll help you figure out your permits and figure out how to close your street down, and when we first started talking about this, we started talking about it from the perspective of building resilience and getting people emergency prepared, blah, 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 blah. And I'm telling you, everyone shuts down. Boop. Not interested in talking about how I'm going to survive the next earthquake, because that's just so depressing, right? But when you say, like, we're going to have a block party and we think we can have music. Does anybody know a band? And like, could you do hot dogs, and can you bring an apple pie? Suddenly, it's like we're party planning, and party planning is community organizing, right? So you got to fit who's gonna make sure we get the amplified sound permit. We got the fee waived, but we still have to put out the paperwork. Who's gonna get the band? Who's gonna get the food? Right? And the next thing you know, you're working with your neighbors, right? You're talking to each other, and of course you have to put a flyer in every car, and then you have to put a flyer in every door because, well, duh, you're gonna close the street down. But that's a really great model of saying, we're going to do this thing that's fun. It's kind of like going to the movies. Like, you're going to go to the outdoor cinema, right? Like, how fun is that? Like, do something fun, and in that fun thing, there's a public good, there's a common good, and there's community organizing. So I just applaud the Neighbor Fest model, because it says start with fun, and then you do a natural build, as opposed to you're crowbarring your way into convincing people that they want to do this like miserable volunteering thing that's going to suck. And you're going to think about when your house falls down because there's an earthquake, right? Like denial. We all want to go there immediately.
I love
so,
that.
Yeah.
That's great. I kind of want to stay on this train of fun a little longer. Tips and tricks to hosting a fun event that, people leave and are like, that was an event that I want to go to again, and I'm telling all my friends.
What I'll say to what Sophie was just saying reminded me one time of a conversation I had with Margot. Margot's my manager at TogetherSF, and she was going to be here today. And me and Margot both went to UCSB. I'm not sure if you've heard of that school,
Ooh.
but predominantly when you're a student there, your job is to plan a party every weekend. And I was talking to her, and I was like, wait, we're in this industry because we're just planning parties all the time, right? She's like, yeah, actually, kind of, yeah, And it's really important for the people who come out and volunteer to get together and meet each other, get to know each other, hang out. Sometimes alcohol is very helpful. The example I want to give is, so for the Stop Asian Hate work, it began with people coming together and having dinner at a restaurant in Chinatown to support an Asian business and to kind of liven up a merchant corridor that was really dead. There was no tourists during COVID, there was no foot traffic, there was attacks against Asian people, and that's how we started. And those dinners ended up at a bar, became parties almost every night. And these are all volunteers who showed up to volunteer for the most recent Asian Heritage Month award ceremony that was at Herbst Theater in City Hall. And if you guys know, this year's Asian Heritage Month theme is forging community bonds. And those community bonds are forged at these get-togethers, neighborhood block parties, events that are food and drink and people getting to know each other and motivating themselves behind the cause.
Yeah, this is all great stuff. I feel like this is like the heart of what it takes to have a successful program. I mean, I think as a volunteer manager, especially when we have a big volunteer program, I've actually talked to our interns and young staff that have come in and said, your job, as the main organizer, is you're like the host of a party. And we actually have talked to our volunteer managers when we're during trainings of that's what you're a social butterfly, and your job is to make people feel welcome. Your job is not to sit down and show how hard you can pull broom or pull weeds, but your job is to go around, and especially with the new folks, is to introduce yourself and get them chatting, make introductions. Super important, but food. You should always have some food or have somebody who's going to bring something. It's just nice, even if it's the most simple little box of crackers or something, but there should be a moment where you can come together and you can hand and share food, drink. That's something that I don't know, I couldn't do during COVID because of our, policies. But I think we're finally coming out of that. When I was at the Presidio Nursery on Saturdays, we always had salsa music playing. So whatever it is, if you can do that, it's not really appropriate in some places, if you can have music. But again, think of yourself as the host. If you have a group of regulars, how are you going to make sure that the new people that are coming in that are volunteering for the first time are going to feel like they're just as much a part of the group as the regulars? People can get a little territorial sometimes, so you might want to tell one of your regulars, like, hey, I need you to look out for this new person, so it's their job to bring them in.
Awesome. And you guys kind of touched on this a little bit, but, what makes a successful event? Is it, there's always going to be, the hard data. Oh, we picked up XYZ amount of trash. We pulled out this many weeds today. So do you hold a lot of weight in those quantitative variables, or is it more about, the impression that the volunteers leave with, like, oh, I had a good time?
I think they're both really important. I think we talked earlier about how you need to have a clear mission, and you need to be able to express that mission. So every one of your new volunteers should hear about how we're working towards this lofty goal, which is a clean, beautiful street that you live on. But I think every day you should have smaller goals, like smaller incremental steps towards your larger goals. And when you wrap up, or as you're starting off, when you have everybody together, you really have to touch on how the day's activities are taking you one step closer to your overarching vision. So I think you just always want to be hitting that again and again. And I think if you are doing that, then you are going to leave people feeling like they're contributing and they're giving their time to something worthy.
Yeah, I agree. I think, I guess I would say a step further too, and how I gauge the success of events that I go to, is that another event will come from it, like a cleanup or like any kind of volunteer gathering. Is that someone's coming up to me and saying, "Hey, I would love to start this in my own neighborhood. I would like to do my version of this with my friends." That's for me. I'm like, okay, we did a good job here today. But I definitely think that.
Yeah, I like that.
It starts with the mission and the purpose, and it ends with another event happening.
Yeah, and maybe to echo something slightly different with that. So my group is small. It's not a small mailing list. It's like 300 people. But I put out at least a monthly newsletter, if not every 2 weeks. And, I try very hard to be cheerful and give progress reports and updates and information. And I know I'm being successful when somebody actually talks to me on the street and asks me a question about something they read. I'm like, oh, you read my newsletter. Oh my God. Because sometimes I think we do this work and, at the end of the day, especially as a person who's organizing it, you've given your thanks, you've given your kudos, you've appreciated everyone, you've got the sign-in sheets, you've scanned them, you put them in a file somewhere. But do you know, was that good? Did it work? Do people, because people leave at different times and they're exhausted and they're dirty and they're like, I gotta go. And sometimes, Forrest will have them go to the bar and then you don't see them after that. So you're putting everything away. But when someone responds, just even to a little sideline or a picture or something, it's been successful because there's been a recipient, and I think that you got to take those things and love them.
Yeah. And all three of you guys are kind of leading efforts that, are long-term. With trash picking, there's always going to be trash in San Francisco, right? You're gonna hit or maybe not, but you hit a block, and sometimes it's discouraging, and you return like a week later, and you're like, it doesn't look like there's more trash here. What the heck happened? Or you're pulling like French broom, and then, a month later, you're like, those can't be baby sprouts, like, sprouting back. You're like, what the heck? So it's not something you can leave and just, like, turn away from and forget about forever, right? So how do you keep volunteers and stewards dedicated to a long-term project?
Well, a common theme we've talked about is community. People come out the first time because of the cause that you're all championing, and they'll stay because of the community that you fostered and the relationships that they've built. They'll stay because you're recognizing birthdays and you're asking them how their vacation was. So that's certainly one piece of the puzzle. I know there's a lot of pieces, but I'll just hand it over to you. I'm sure there's lots of ideas here.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think people are really coming back, not because there's more trash, but because of the relationships. I think relationships are very dynamic. And on that note, like, I do think a key to sustainability is some dynamicness. You can't just, hey, let's show up and pick up trash, like, every single, like, time. Like, there has to be a little bit of flair, like some incredible food that Sophie's wonderful husband makes, or a birthday trash pickup, or we're gardening for Earth Day, and those kind of things keep it lively.
Yeah, and diversity of activities. I think when it's only weeding, it gets a little sad. But I think we've started to introduce art activities in our events, and I think activities that you can dedicate for some young people to do that they can take leadership over. So sometimes we built a book box, and then we have a little pollinator garden that's so there's sort of keeping that when we did the mural, it was like, how do we incorporate people into the mural feedback, so that's an activity that then when it starts to happen, you're like, oh, I was a part of that decision making process. So for me, especially a hyper-local, long-term project, making it different and complex, so that you're reaching different people's needs, and then for also moving around, so it's not just this one group of people, but other people's needs get taken care of, and sometimes that means going across the street, hanging out with them.
Yeah. So what are I want to switch gears a little bit. Biggest challenges. What are some of the biggest challenges in running a successful volunteer program?
I used to work a strict 9 to 5, and like when I was at a bank, it was like more like 9 to 3. Sorry if you trust your bank. I didn't realize how much of an asset time is. Yeah. Time is like the biggest constraint. Everything that comes with it, bandwidth, your ability to help, it's all constrained by time. And I've never felt it before. I felt like I've always had time for my friends and hanging out and seeing my mom and dad. And now it seems like a 24-hour job sometimes.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. I just want to jump on that, because I don't think it's something I would have said, but I'm like, yeah, what he said. It's I think in my early days of being a volunteer manager, I didn't have kids. And I didn't have as many outside responsibilities. And I was running programs nights sometimes. I also did a lot of fundraising with volunteers. I was doing stuff on weekends, and I loved it. It was the center of my life. And I'm older, and I have kids, and they have things, and my family wants to see me. And that's constantly something that I run up against, is the time that I really need to be most available to engage people is also when my family really wants and needs me as well. So that's very, very true. The other, just a couple of things that I've struggled with. I think we're mostly here focused on physical gardening, greening, but I mentioned I also have done fundraising. I've done a lot of community outreach with volunteers, and those each bring separate challenges. Fundraising sometimes very was challenging for me at times, and then it's also sometimes I find it much easier to organize programs in San Francisco where you've got just literally a denser population of people, and maybe most of you are working in San Francisco, so you've got that working for you. But if you're not in San Francisco, if you're in Marin or in a smaller community, that's just a reality. And then also it's harder to engage volunteers when you're not bringing people all together in a group. It's harder when you're managing individual volunteers. So that's something I've struggled with at times.
Yeah, those weekends, man.
Yeah.
Especially when you work like all week. You're like, oh, it's Saturday.
Yeah.
I gotta work again.
Yeah.
So I think being kind to yourself, I think being kind, and one of the things I tried to do, I'll get back to it, I promise, is take a day off during the week if I knew I had an event on the weekend. So it's like, can I take Friday off if I'm working on Saturday, or if I'm working on Sunday, and just knowing that you've only got so much to give, so don't give it all to your volunteer group, and pace yourself, because I think being burnt out makes it not a very fun experience for those volunteers either. They're like, oh great, grouchy Sophie, that's fun, as opposed to Forrest shows up and you're like, I want to work with that guy, right? So whatever you can do, either it doesn't think time you can skip a month, you can skip a week, you can whatever, but when you can bring your best self, or you can ask someone else to volunteer, right? You can bring in some other energy that can diversify.
Great. Just quick time check. It looks like we've got about 5 or so minutes left. I want to open up to the audience. If you guys have any questions you'd like to ask our panelists, go ahead and.
I'd like to know the mechanics of how Sophie's works with TogetherSF for an event. Let's say I've got a clean ingredient party coming up in June, and I need volunteers for the park. But I also have a restriction that for every 12 volunteers, I have to have a gardener. So let's say you come up with 80 people. And how soon do I know that these 80 people are going to show up so I could go to Rec and Park and say, hey, any gardeners want to work on a Saturday?
I don't think me or Sophie expected 80 people. That was a real surprise. It was at the height of the Vince Chronicle article, and everybody was like, I got to find the next cleanup. How it works is we're essentially functioning TogetherSF like a volunteer hub. So there's opportunities all over San Francisco that aren't just cleanups, that are all sorts of great ways to volunteer, and people are checking out our website. And then we host a sign-up page on our website. So we'll host an event like Sophie's event, or we'll host another event. And so the way it functions is that it increases Sophie's reach, right? Sophie is focused on the people that live near her neighborhood as she should, and then we have people who are just interested in just finding a way to volunteer. Some of them don't even live in San Francisco, but they want to come here for the weekend, and before they hit the club, they want to pull some weeds, and so I guess to answer your question, we can exchange emails. There's a lot of cleanups. We've imposed a limit, so there's no 80 people showing up per sign-up, per event. Public Works has been a great partner, but they definitely have also limited resources. If you've been around as long as Sophie, you probably know the story behind that. And so we're kind of trying to give a good 3 to 4 week runway for events, just so that there's enough time for every one of our partners to be able to meet the needs.
But I think it happens that if I know I'm doing a specific kind of planting event, let's just say, or a specific kind of weeding event, you really need to have designated experts. Exactly. Well, and I think, making sure that a person knows the difference between a native grass and an invasive grass. You don't want them taking all your babies up. But I think, so I think when we work together, it's sort of like, okay, here's the dates, here's the event, and here's our scope, and we actually haven't technically done a garden scope together, but we ended up having that. But I have people where I'm like, okay, I know this is what I need to do. I don't know how many people will show up, but I know it's going to be between 30 and 60. And then I'll say, okay, Marnie, you're going to be the leads on. You'll be a weed lead, and you'll be a best practice, root ball opener person, right? So, and sometimes people show up willy-nilly, and it's not like, boom, we have a kickoff and it's happening. There's sort of, slow roll. But I always, if I have a thing that I know I need experts, I'll make sure that I'll have those people in advance.
So, Forrest, you set a cap or limit?
Yeah.
Sign-up limit?
Each cleanup now has a 45-person limit, just like as an upper limit. This way we can have more cleanups, and yeah.
Great, yeah, tap into TogetherSF. They're a great, powerful resource. I think I saw another hand over here. Go ahead, you can go.
My questions are related to on-site volunteer management. How long is too long to ask volunteers to work for this kind of physical work, and how do you motivate volunteers who are kind of slacking or not taking it seriously, or just they want to be there, but they're just not doing a very good job? I mean, if they were an employee, you have recourse, but not so volunteers.
Can't fire volunteers.
Yeah, I've had that feeling too. You're like, you walk up to somebody, you're like, here's a pick. I think you have to have realistic expectations, realize it's people's time off. So that's something I've sometimes had to chill out a little bit about. When I've done habitat restoration, gardening type work days, we usually did them as a 3-hour thing with a little bit of extra emphasis, like encouraging people, if possible, to show up at the beginning, because that's when we do the introduction and the safety talk. I try really hard to make it known that it's okay if people have to leave early, especially now that I'm older and I have kids and I know how hard it is to be a working mom. It's like, oh my God, you came out here for an hour. Thank you. That was awesome. So no guilt trips for leaving early. And I don't let people tell me that they feel guilty because they haven't come out enough. No guilt trips at all. And then, in terms of strategy, someone's just standing around talking, there might not be too much you could do, but you could also ask them, hey, would you mind, I don't have any photos of the workday today. Would you be up for taking pictures for me? Or here's my clipboard. Would you mind checking people in or having them sign in because I haven't collected everybody's signature yet? I don't know, something like that, but maybe you guys have other ideas.
I would say I think there's 2 parts to your question. The first part is how long can you ask someone to work? I'm definitely as I mentioned, I'm a big believer in meeting people where they're at. We get asked at TogetherSF all the time to raise volunteers for some of the amazing festivities around San Francisco, and some of those festivals are 6 hours long, right? So you got to break them up into 2-hour shifts, and you got to stagger shifts because some people might show up late. And some people will straight up sign up for 6 hours. I am so excited to volunteer. Some people will sign up for 1 shift. And then you want to over-prepare, I think. Every shift that shows up, I'll have myself or a volunteer captain do a briefing. These are your expectations, managing expectations. I think you said that very clearly, this is what you're supposed to do. But these festivals and these events in San Francisco are so fun that people get lost in oh my God, I want to enjoy this event as well. And you can't stop that. Fun is fun.
Yeah, I would agree. Mostly we do Saturday 10 to 12, so that people can roll out of bed. Most of the people that I have show up on time, and often people will be like, but I can only do an hour, and that's always enough. And then I think the person who's sort of wandering around, I'm always like, do you need a special project? And sometimes I think people just want to hang out and talk, and that's cool. Yeah. But if they look lost, confused, or kind of slacky, I think it's because they don't have a special project.
Any more questions for our panelists?
I mean, I just want one comment that I feel that these kind of small volunteer things are really important for organizational growth, because that's where you're going to get your board members, your new leaders, and even like a small fun event is super important, because without it, your organization will be sustainable.
Yeah. That, you know, one of the things I didn't talk about, which was that I, like, so this is my, like, my little neighborhood project. But when I work in the Western Addition, I'm working in a community of low-income folks. Nobody's a volunteer. Like, we either have a party and you're invited to the party, or we have work days and people get paid. And I think that's super important. Like, I think that if you can afford to volunteer, fantastic, we love you. But going into a community that is low income, you have to assume that that's, you know, you're not building your board, you're supporting the improvement of a community. So you can bring volunteers in and say, you know, it's MLK Day, we're cleaning up, in service to this community, and I think that in service thing is like, we are here to support this place that it may not be getting and what it, but also recognizing that people need to be supported, and you talked about that, sort of on a more psychic level, but I think some people just need to work and you need to pay them.
Yeah, that's great.
I think my response to what you're saying is I agree that like there's a really important like small fun social aspect, and we're even trying some stuff at TogetherSF, like we did a couple of trivia nights, just for people in our network to come meet each other, like no weed pulling, no trash picking up, no lifting boxes, just because that volunteer cohesion works both ways, right? There's people who've come and volunteered before, or there's people who have just like lurked us on Instagram, but they want to see what we're about. And they're showing up, and that's kind of how you build that volunteer cohesion.
Great. I think we're wrapping up on time here, but thank you to Sophie, Forrest, and Monica for sharing their knowledge with us. Yeah, let's give them a round of applause. Go team!
Can I do my shameless plug?
Yes.
Sorry, shameless plug, everybody. This weekend, I'm going to be at 2 events, and I'd love if you or your friend would like to come. I'm doing a cleanup in Portola on Saturday, and then we're launching a brunch version of Chinatown Fridays, which is like a dining event to support an Asian business on Sunday at noon, a boozy brunch with alcohol. Yeah. I'll be at both the Saturday and the Sunday event, and then lastly, we are trying to raise our cohort of summer interns. So if you know of anybody, young person, high school, college age, I think the minimum age is it's either 16 or 18. But please have them apply, and we'll give them a great chance to volunteer and be a little mini community caretaker. Sorry.
Amazing.
Yeah. Any more plugs? I'm sorry.
Yeah, any more plugs?
Go to those
Sophie and Monica.
programs.
Great.
Busy brunch.
Yeah, I think we can keynote soon, I think. I know it's been a long day, so get up, stretch. There should be some beverages out in the courtyard.